Unmuted.
Hello, everyone. Mr. Wilbur, you're still here. Haven't seen you in a while. Hiding out. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. We're a little late starting. Okay. Madam Chair. I'm just kidding. Yes. I'm just joking. Try to keep these meetings light. Okay. Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson.
Daniel Bulland.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Randy Solt.
Kevin Cross.
Forrest Dunbar.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Christopher Constant.
Courtney Peterson.
Lance Wilbur.
Alden Thurn. Dan Moore, Treasury.
And Courtney, Lance, Alden, and Dan are all from the administration, and the others are all on the assembly. We have Desiree Camacho from the clerk's office today here, and then some folks in the audience as well. It looks like Ms. Brawley is here. The first item on our agenda is 3A, report from the Budget Advisory Commission. I understood she might be late, but she is here. So welcome, Ms. Brawley.
Madam Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Allard. Ms. Allard is on the phone.
Sorry.
Anybody else on the phone?
I am.
This is Ross Roosevelt. I'm
Hi,
on the
Ross.
phone as well.
Great, from the
Felix
administration.
Rivera.
Thank you, Felix. Sorry to all of you. I forgot to do that. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Hi, thank you. This is Anna Brawley, Chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. So just a brief report, and I believe I shared basically a calendar of our meeting scheduled through the end of the year. So that's just for information. We are continuing to meet monthly. We are looking ahead to the annual budget cycle and just making sure that we have plenty of time, and we'll work with the administration to schedule time to go through the budget when it's available. We know that starts in October. At our August meeting, we talked about something we've been working on for a while and are finally getting started, our department reviews. So essentially having conversations with each of the department heads. We've all been assigned, I think, 3 departments. So really just a learning conversation. How many staff do you have? What does your budget include? What are your non-personnel costs? Really understanding how the line item on the budget plays out in real life. So that'll be really helpful, and we'll have members share back. And we also plan to draft a resolution taking some kind of position on the proposed change to the property tax exemption that will go before, it may go before voters in the spring. And other than that, just continuing to do our usual work. Oh, and I should also report, a couple meetings ago, I shared that we were down several people, and we are almost fully seated now. So we have 10 of our 11 members. We have 1 vacancy. And we'd love to see representation. I know we don't have a lot of representation from Eagle River or Girdwood, so it'd be nice to get some kind of geographic diversity there, just a note. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Brawley. I don't see any questions. I'm glad. Thank you so much for considering the property tax exemption issue. And we, of course, postponed the vote on that so that you all would have time to consider it. Any questions? Okay. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here. So we'll move to the next item of the agenda, which is 3B, an update on the rise in fuel costs for the municipality. Just as sort of some background, I think in April, we were made aware that there might be a shortage of dollars set aside for fuel costs. I'm not exactly sure which departments that it was considered for ARPA funding, but given that there are likely other sources of funding, we did not fund it through ARPA and are looking forward, I think collaboratively, all of us, as this is definitely a priority to solving that problem. But as I review the monthly, budget to actuals, M&O, I think is at, we should be at 58%. Fire is at 56 of spent. M&O is way down there, 43, and police is 54. So they're all below where they should be for the year. So I guess I'm a little confused at where those fuel costs are, because we just haven't been seeing them when we get these updates. It's not apparent from the update. So if someone could detail what departments we're talking about, what amount we're talking about, and then we can maybe talk about solutions. Thanks.
So me and Lance are going to kind of tag team it a little bit. So what you see in the budget versus actuals is through that point in time through the year. And that includes all of their budget. And so with the line items for fuel, once they consume all of what was designated, as the year continues, they'll start kind of eating into the rest of the other areas. And so what you would expect is that, they kind of maintain through half the year if they were spending traditionally. And then now what you'll see is that they wouldn't have the money to continue in some of the other areas because fuel will automatically continue. And so in some of them, what you're going to see is that right now they're showing that, they're still in that range of, not going over for the percent through the year. But now as we get through the second half of the year is if they didn't have additional fuel funds, is they would start eating into those other areas of budgeted, expenses. And so they wouldn't have the ability to do some of the other things. That's where the service impacts and things would start coming now is that, now it's the decision between, we know we're going to have to pay fuel costs. So the leftover budget, does it pay for fuel or does it pay for these other things? And then Lance has some information for specifically M&O and the other public works departments.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I'll just say that I understand what you're saying, but that would assume that there are higher costs for other parts of the departments later that are not reflected here. So I guess my point is, from looking at this, we cannot tell that there's an issue. And this is what we've been looking at for a few months. So glad to have you, Lance, here to give us some more information. Mr. Dunbar has a question.
Yeah, first sort of a statement and then a question. And, I think it was just sort of a miscommunication with you, Courtney, or I guess with your predecessor in some ways. I guess you were. So we've had at least 3 budget meetings. We have, May, June, July. We have budget meetings, and we always have this sort of standard update. And what I heard at those updates was that generally things are going pretty well. This one's running a little hot. I know the chief equity officer, that office got highlighted a couple times. So it's like, there's some departments running a little hot, but in general, we're good. We're on pace. I mean, that's what I heard the last 3 months. And so it was surprising when the mayor and his team came and said, we are in crisis. You must fund this or we're not going to have enough gas for fire trucks and buses. I mean, this is what he said on the floor. And to me, that's just a dissonance between that and the presentations we've been getting for the last 3 months. Now, I think you've explained it well now, but I guess my request would be that next year, if this is the same thing is happening, please sort of flag it for us a little earlier so that we understand in May that, even though the budget actuals look good, there's this other cost or this other factor. They're gonna quickly look not good, if that makes sense. So that's the statement. And then the question I have is, I assume when you're projecting out to December, you're using sort of an estimated price, the price of gas. So at what point, so I guess what price are you estimating? How is that working? Because we've seen this kind of radical fluctuation, and I assume we consume this budget because gas prices went up, but they've been going down now for a number of weeks and look like they might continue to fall. So can Lance maybe walk us through a little bit the way you estimate that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. And good question, Mr. Dunbar. My name is Lance Wilbur. I'm the Director of Public Works. And for those in the Department of Public Works, we have three major departments, maintenance and operations, project management, engineering, and traffic. And inside the maintenance and operations department, they have the fleet and the M&O fleet. And this is for general government. We do not manage the fire department. We do not manage public transportation or any of the utilities. So this is just, it does include APD. And the other thing that it includes in public works, maintenance and operations is streets, plowing. So for those who might not be familiar with how all of the departments in public works. So as part of one of our responsibilities, the fuel budget, the payment of both gas and diesel for general government, for those departments I mentioned, all of general government, including APD, but not fire, not transit, and again, not the utilities. We track that. Right now, we've been tracking it monthly since about April. And the way in which we built the budget, first of all, let me just start off with the estimated amount of usage. So we estimate about 560,000 gallons of gas in a year. We estimate about 330 to 350,000 gallons of diesel. So in simple terms, APD consumes most of the gas. Streets consumes most of the diesel. So I'm going to, in general terms, that's basically how it works. So when we look at the departments that are really struggling for fuel, the ones that really stick out are APD and streets, and we have a couple other ones. I know a little bit about transit, so I suspect that they are in a similar situation. But in general terms, I told you how much usage for budget in gas for all general government. We budget about 1.5 million for all of those departments. As of basically the end of July, they'd already spent 1.67. They'd spent more than their budget as of July just on gas. And then on diesel, we budget about 815,000. They'd already spent 850,000. So we priced our budgets based on $4 a gallon. I mean, it was like $3.90 for gas, $3.81 or $3.87 for diesel. So we averaged at about $7 a gallon. We were enjoying that, for lack of a better word, for the first 2 months of the year. And then about March and April, it went from 4 to 5. And after March, it went from 5 to 6. And all the way through July, it was basically $6 a gallon. So the hole that we got into just got in the beginning of the month. So if prices get back down to closer to $4 a gallon, that's not going to close that gap unless it goes to $2 a gallon. So we have already that deficit that many of these departments are going to struggle with, particularly streets, particularly fire. So to Mr. Dunbar's question, we are seeing the prices come down. I think right now our gas prices are about $1 to 60 cents above what we budgeted in July. Diesel is still maybe $1 or $2 above what we budgeted. If both of those continue for the rest of the year, we're going to need $500,000 at a minimum just for gas and another $250,000 or more for diesel. And we're already in the hole on both. So, I mean, we are tracking it very, very closely. And I think, some departments are going to be challenged. They have a pretty small gas or diesel budget. Some of them are very, very big. I mean, APD's budget's $1 million, it's $1.1 million or $2 million, and they've already got $1.4 million spent of the amount. I mean, they're the bulk of it. So I think it's going to be very difficult for APD. It's going to be very difficult for streets. And to Madam Chair, to your question and to Courtney's, what happens? What do we do if we don't get relief? I look at the entire Public Works Department, and streets is one, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that if we do not get any more money, we got to figure out how we are going to manage and change our street service to provide the basics for streets. So subdivisions, you know, that level of service is likely going to get reduced. And we're feeling it in other places.
Mr. Wilbur?
Yeah.
Can I just stop you there? It looks like Mr. Solt has a question. I guess instead of getting into what's going to happen if something goes wrong, I'd like to know exactly how much money you need in a document that we can all review, and
Sure.
then we'd like to talk about solutions. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Solt.
Yeah, just real quick, is your fuel consumption like straight line, or does it vary by month? Are winters heavier than summers?
It varies. It's for streets, it's heavier in the beginning and the end. For APD, it's constant.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess I should say, does someone have the document that describes exactly where the shortfalls are and how much you need? And normally, as you know, Lance, you've been here a long time,
Right.
And administration would bring forward a proposal. Have you decided how to do that? I mean, we brought up there's about $5.5 million extra dollars of community assistance revenue that we're going to get this year. Is that something you're looking at? What's the solution you see?
So through the chair, we do track it. We have some information. I have not had an opportunity to share that with OMB or the manager's office, and I want to do that before then. So I can certainly prepare it. It's not a lengthy process to do because we do track it. And so I can do that.
Okay, great. And I guess I just say, again, sort of to Mr. Dunbar's point, if this is a problem, we want to help solve it. But if we don't have information, we can't help solve it. So please get that to us, and then we can all work on this together. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. So on that topic, maybe a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I received an email from the former OMB director in which it was asserted that we'd been broadly briefed on this issue 3 months ago or something. And I think it's important for the public, for members of the committee to hear what we were told is fuel is an open question. That was a quote. You can listen back to the tapes. We weren't given any kind of detailed brief. We weren't given any framework on which to base the ideation of what does an open question mean. Certainly no one was raising red flags. And so it's been asserted pretty broadly in the public that the administration has been sounding the alarm. And I continue to ask members of the public who repeat that statement to please provide for us firsthand sources of that. Because just because somebody said there has been broad outreach and telling us this is a problem doesn't mean it actually occurred. And so I think that gets to the point that the chair was making about how we need briefings in detail, not just in insinuations, because if later it's going to come back and they're going to try to whip us that you haven't done your job, I'm going to rebut that by saying, show me the records.
Mr. Peterson, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Lance, I believe we were informed that when we put the contract out to bid, we only had one bidder this time around. And so that kind of put us in a disadvantageous position. And so I'm wondering, have we ever reached out to the refinery in Kenai to see if they'd be willing to make a bid wholesale to us? I mean, we buy a good number of gallons of fuel. So I'm just throwing ideas out there. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, I think we received 2 or 3 bids. The way in which the bids came in, the companies have reassessed on how they bid their product to us, and they're doing it to everywhere. It used to be that we paid a wholesale price plus or minus a percent. Now what we do is we pay a retail set price, and it was the best reduction from retail. And the best reduction from retail, I think, was either 18 cents or 10 cents. And what we used to pay was wholesale plus like 3 cents or 3%. So we only had one bidder that bid that way. And the next time we do it, I suspect they will do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And I guess I don't want to be repetitive, but I just want to say, sort of to Mr. Cross's point yesterday in a committee about all the back and forth and, the admin did this or the assembly did. If there's a fuel shortage, we just want to solve the problem. So let's just figure it out together. This is something we all care about. We all want streets to be plowed. We all want M&O to be able to do their job. And so we can figure it out. So let's just figure out what the problem is, get the details, and then let's put together a resolution, whether you guys want to do it or you want us to do it. We're here to solve that problem. Ms. LaFrance, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for this information, Lance. So just in looking at the document of the budget to actuals report, and just to the point about being able to track any upward pressures through the year that, like with fuel, it would be helpful to me if, and I don't know if it's possible on the sheet, but in some way to identify those kinds of variable upward pressures as we move through the year to see, how we're doing in line with those initial estimated run rate costs. And I don't know what the best format necessarily is. I know in other types of organizations like travel is a variable cost sometimes, or shipping, but I don't think that is such an impact as, the municipality. So maybe it would be largely fuel. Sorry, it looked like you were going to say something.
Through the chair, I think I was telling Courtney that when we do the reports monthly, we will add some more information about fuel that might be helpful to them and to you. So certainly.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
I guess I'm just wondering how much of the fuel consumption is based on, you average the miles used in a year. I mean, you're estimating based on, how much we actually consume, how far we're driving, how many calls we go out, et cetera. And I guess my curiosity lies in, are we having this budget shortfall even though we're driving less, and even though should we anticipate on a normal year it'd actually be a much greater need? So year over year, it can't be the exact same miles. So how are we so far, our transportation needs, regardless of budget? Are we at a high driving year, low driving year? What does it look like so that we can project properly into the future?
And through the chair, Mr. Cross, we can get you that information because we do track the mileage by vehicle. I can say for general government, it has probably been down. For snowplow and graders, it's probably the same. And for APD, I suspect it's generally the same amount, but we can certainly provide that average miles traveled by department, by vehicle.
The question then lies, if it's going down or increasing, then making sure those projections are accurate so that we don't end up with the situation again because we're driving a lot more than we anticipated. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Ms. Allard, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you, by any chance, tell us Lance, when you first found out about the fuel shortage?
Through the chair, Ms. Allard, I would say that when the prices started probably in middle of March, because for January through February, we were pretty much spending what we budgeted. It probably wasn't until the end of April when we really started to get concerned, because it had only gone up about $1 a gallon, but then it went up and it didn't like it, what was going to come down. So I would say, probably in the late May timeframe is when we really started to get concerned. And then from a department's perspective, that's when we started to see that concern, is when it started to go up, because there were things going on in parts of the world that really made it give us some concern.
Madam Chair, may I?
Of course.
Follow up. Okay, thank you. I agree with that. And then I do know it had been brought to our attention. My question, so then it was brought to our attention, I think, again, when we got the ARPA funds, and I think it was because the administration felt that they could access that funds for the fuel. Is that the first time that you recall bringing it forward to us as the assembly, Lance? I'm just trying to get a timeline here, so.
Yes, through the chair, Ms. Allard, you're correct. The department put together a host of requests to the administration for the ARPA funds. One of those was an adjustment in fuel, and And so, yeah, you are correct. We did at that time.
Okay. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Ms. Howard. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
So this is a question before we pivot off of shortfalls. We had a communication from the chief of police that they have a $400,000 or so shortfall in funds available for towing abandoned vehicles. Are you spooled up on that? And so the question that I have is, what are some strategies proposed by the administration to fill that shortfall? Because I think anyone who's been around long enough to have seen the abandoned vehicles not being towed sees how quickly that turns into a major community problem.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant. Yes, we have had those conversations, and we actually have a meeting scheduled for this coming week with the police department where we're going to discuss the strategies, get some statistics on the towing, what our contract looks like. I don't have a lot of details of how the towing contract is structured. And so we want to look at that and see exactly what our costs are based on, you know, if they're evidence vehicles or vehicles where people are getting impounded and then they go get them, you know, are we paying for that? And they're kind of getting a free pass, or, you know, those kind of things. So we're going to have that conversation, really dig into it and come up with what the need looks like and some strategies on addressing that.
Yeah, thanks. The chief definitely said in his communication that evidence vehicles will continue to be towed, which they have a duty to do. But the other vehicles, which are the ones that show up in front of someone's house or in the street somewhere that aren't in the right of way, are the problem. And I think you would find strong support to a solution if we could come up with some proposals. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we're ready to move on. Just sort of wrapping up, a final note. To the extent you have requests, please just inform us and talk with us. We're here every month. You know where to find us. We want to help solve these problems, if they in fact exist. We don't have all the information yet, but I agree that they probably do. Okay, moving on. Thanks for being here, Mr. Wilbur. Moving on to 3C. We requested last time from Ms. Peterson an update on the alcohol tax program, both 2021 history of money that was budgeted, money that was spent, and then specifically within those categories, what that money was spent on. I see that we received documents with the first two there that I listed, but maybe not specifically how the money was spent, like who the grantees were, et cetera. So we can talk about that. And then also going through the 2022 program details. I think from an assembly member perspective, and others may disagree, but it's hard when we get an appropriation request out of the alcohol tax because we don't always know how much is left or how much was, was set aside for homelessness, for instance, and where are we on spending. So all of this stuff is critical to us being able to appropriate funds that the municipality needs to function. So Courtney, I have a bunch of questions. I'm sure others do too. Do you want to just run through these and then we'll just do questions as we go?
I'm not sure that I have a lot of information other than kind of what you're seeing. So if you guys want to just shoot off questions, I can
Okay.
see what I can answer for you and then.
Sure. Okay.
Mhm.
Let's start with 2021 and just go down the line here. And it may be that if you don't have some of the information, we might need to do a follow-up meeting that includes departments, for instance, maybe police, fire, health department that has information on some of these line items. So I guess my first question, and maybe Desiree, I don't know if you're able to do this, but perhaps you could take notes on the questions and then we could send them to these guys so they could get answers back to us. So, and anybody just interrupt or raise your hand if you have a question too. I'm just going to go down because I reviewed this already. But the first one is line 2. This is for 2021, the evidence-based grants for child abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence. That's great to see that the whole amount was awarded. Please, if we could have a list of which groups receive funding, because we do get complaints periodically from groups, and it's nice for us to say, oh no, actually you were awarded funding, here's the record that you got it, and to do what work. It also helps for the assembly to be able to tell the story, which this year we have a $50,000 appropriation to do education for the public on the alcohol tax, and understanding where the money went and what it's doing in our community for good helps us tell that story. Do you have a question, Mr. Volan, or are you just happily smiling? Okay. So you got an engaged listener over there. Okay. My next question, and again, I don't want to hog it, so people interrupt if you want, is down to first responders on line 10, fire. It looks like we spent less than half of the money set aside for mental health first response, firefighter, paramedics, social workers, mental health clinicians, admin officer, and battalion chief. So I guess I would ask, since that was, I better know the answer to this. It started in right before I left as mayor, right? June or July?
Yeah, so a lot of the lines that had personnel, the alcohol tax didn't get implemented until February. And so that was kind of the point of time at which we had the authority to start hiring. And as anyone who has gone through our hiring processes, it takes a couple of months to do that. And so a lot of these positions didn't start until later in the year. So probably June, July timeframe. So a lot of the lines that have personnel, that's part of what you're seeing, is that those positions didn't get filled until later in the year. So.
Okay. And specifically that program, I mean, I remember we were all working with Chief Hetrick at the time to get it going. And I think it started either June 1 or July 1. I can't remember. So that's probably why. Okay. So we'll skip 11 and 12, same issue. 13, there was no money spent, correct? So that seems like that would be but that's shelter operations. So I wonder if that was FEMA, paid out of FEMA or what?
So line 13 was an appropriation, and we kind of highlighted that in the description. So in AR 2021-17S, that was a one-time appropriation where we reduced the amount of shelter funding and gave it to police to aid in their computer-aided dispatch and record management system project.
And did they spend that?
No, they did not spend the portion from the alcohol tax designated for that.
Do you know why?
I don't know why, but I can sure follow up with them on why.
Okay, and Desiree will probably get that down on the questions too.
Okay, I would suspect that they would probably say that because that was the implementation of the special levy tax also came on. And that also funded that same program. And, as we know, they're still working through that process. And so I'm not sure last year they were far enough along that they were actually spending all of those funds, to get to these.
Great. And if members of the public are listening, when you're talking about the levy, she's talking about the body cams.
Yes.
And so that might be wrapped up in there and still
in process. I don't remember what AO approved it, but
me neither. Okay, on to homelessness. It looks like the Pay for Success and Home for Good housing program, only 300,000 out of 1.8 million was spent. Do you know the story on that one?
So there is, and they're working on getting us kind of the breakdown of how the payments are working. They're lagging behind a little bit. And so you'll notice that already for this year, we've paid 516,000. And so over the next, I think 2 years, the breakdown of how we expect those invoices to come in, but they're actively working with United Way, who runs that program for us. They're actively working with them and making the payments as we're invoiced. And so they're going to provide us with that. And I can provide that with the breakdown of the grantees from those other lines.
And if I recall correctly, one of the great things about the Home for Good program that we all supported and happened while I was acting mayor was that we only paid out if we weren't successful. And so we got a lot of funding from outside folks to contribute to that program. So maybe that's why we didn't pay the full amount. Does that seem right? Do you remember that, Mr. Constant? Don't remember or don't agree? I don't agree. Don't agree. Okay. Did you want to speak up then?
Yeah, I can. I don't think that we aren't on the hook for those dollars if there's not, or if there is success. I think that the third parties are the ones who see some benefit if the success benchmarks are met. But I think we're on the hook for the costs of our own the whole way through. I could be wrong, but that's my memory and recollection.
Yeah, so maybe just Desiree can probably jot that one down, but just getting some more information about where we are there. If we're going to expect annually that we don't need to pay quite that much, then maybe we could use some of those funds for other things.
And I might suggest that we ask for a briefing on the Pay for Success project, maybe not at the Budget Committee, but at the Health Policy Committee or Homeless and Housing, so we can get a firsthand report how it's working, where they are, what the fisc is for them.
That's a great idea. Yeah, so sort of separate topic, but I've noticed that we haven't been having health policy committee meetings. Mr. Voland, are you stepping up in a chair or co-chair?
I'm going to
role?
be the co-chair, and we are going to be talking about alcohol tax spends at our next meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
something different than this, or just following
Well,
up?
I think we
or-
want to see more details on who the grantees were, and
Okay.
Yeah, get more details.
Okay, well, let me know if you want to
Will do.
collaborate, so
Great.
we're not duplicating. But yeah, if you know, at Mr. Constant's request, if you could focus at some point on the Home for Good
You
program,
bet.
you know, where is it? What are we doing? And I believe United Way is a good contact for that. Okay, great. 23, 24, 25, I assume those are all FEMA paid, and so we didn't use the alcohol tax funds, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, this was 2021, so we were
Yeah.
still in
COVID.
the response. Yeah. And so we weren't utilizing the shelter dollars.
Okay, and then line 33, a full year of funding for non-labor cost supporting enforcement. That's a tiny amount, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm just curious, do you know anything about what kind of enforcement we've had to do since it was, a few times higher than we expected?
You're referencing the so
Line 33, yeah.
yeah. So I think what happened there, and actually Dan might be able to help me with this. I believe what happened was, as part of the implementation of the software that we utilize in order to collect the taxes, was in a capital project. And so then when we reviewed the expenses that were in there, some of them were deemed to not be capitalizable as part of that asset. And so it got moved over to the alcohol tax. And so these costs were actually related to the implementation of the software in order to be able to collect the alcohol tax.
Okay, so probably that same cost won't happen in 2022 because it was kind of startup.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in 2022, you'll notice that we did increase the non-labor costs. We just put it as one line item, but we did add the software cost into their non-labor. So that actually includes, more non-labor for them to actually pay the software costs for this
Great.
year. So that.
Great, thanks, Ms. Peterson. Mr. Moore, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to, this is Dan Moore from Treasury. That piece, Courtney's, I think mostly correct. There was some initial capital type project costs, but the ongoing cost is in total, it's $38,000 for the software maintenance for the platform that it's on. Right now, I think we have about half of it in there. So there's a potential to go all the way to 100%. And our goal is to have the alcohol tax enforcement administration be fully funded by alcohol tax dollars. In the beginning, it's actually been covered by other sources, but we're trying to get to it being 100% funded. So thank you.
So thanks, Dan. So if you look at the 2022 document, line 39, this year we funded one tax enforcement officer or two.
Yep.
And non-labor costs supporting it. Does that include that amount? So are you good? Or are you needing an additional appropriation?
For 2023, we proposed to increase it to the 38,000. So we're halfway there. And
Okay.
that's under consideration right now. OMB is going to check with law department to make sure that that's okay.
Got it. Okay, great. So we'll just see that in the next year. Okay. And then the only point I have on 2021 remaining is on line 34, that we had set aside $50,000 to do, educational programs, request feedback from the public, make sure that the alcohol tax was doing what the public had hoped it was doing, and telling the story of the grants, et cetera. And that didn't happen in 2021. We know it was just getting going. But for 2022, the Assembly is working with, I believe they're putting out an RFP, and sorry if I'm using the wrong acronyms, to a few organizations in town that could do educational campaign. Assembly staff are. I guess I shouldn't say campaign. That sounds too. An educational program, and then to collect feedback as well. Okay. Any other questions on 2021? Ms. LaFrance, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what is the remaining fund balance or the amount unspent from 2021? I know I could probably calculate quickly, but it's actually a little bit small for me to read.
So there's two, and I don't have it because, and I guess I'm saying is from 2021 specifically, or do you want like right now? Because there's been some transactions against it, which then, changes that. So I don't have either number, but that way I provide you with the one that you're actually looking for.
I'd actually like to see both
Okay.
2021 and then where it is now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great question. Thank you. And I think I saw Desiree get that down. Were you meaning to ask? No.
No, I guess the most logical would be how much funds are left so that we can deal with the previous issue. Thank you.
Previous issue?
Yeah, the fuel shortage.
Oh,
Yeah, no.
we can't use the alcohol tax for fuels, unfortunately, but there are other funding sources I think we can.
And
Go ahead, Mr.
I
Constant.
I think I want to reiterate the question that Ms. LaFrance just asked and Mr. Cross just re-asked, and that's the question of the difference that remains. And what it looks like to me right here on this is that it's $6.5 million that was unspent at the end of the year after first quarter, probably this year. And so definitely that's a very important pool of funds that I want to make sure we have a close tab on. I'm definitely curious what we've appropriated against that now. And because, yeah, that's a high priority for me to know. Thank you for the question, Ms. LaFrance.
May I just follow up, Madam Chair?
Sure, go
just on
ahead.
that. And I see that column on the far right, 2021 budget versus actuals at the bottom. And I guess to put a finer point on my original question, and I need stronger glasses, but it looks like it's about 6.5 million. And is that what was remaining at the end of the year? And then what is that adjusted amount?
Yep. So there's two components that make up fund balance, and that is obviously the unspent balance. So, but it also is the revenues that are received. So it's actually not budget to actuals. It's revenues received minus actuals gets you what your actual fund balance is. And so that would be what the fund balance number would be. And so we work with the finance department on determining the fund balance, after all of the assets, liabilities, adjustments, they're the ones that do our annual report. So we work with them so we can get that number for you. And then ultimately the transacted against, there were some 2022 fund balance appropriations already. So that would be.
Thank you. And
Yep.
thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Constant, for reiterating my question.
Hang on, Mr. Salt's in the queue, but just on that point, and then I'll go to Mr. Salt. So I do remember an appropriation, I think that Mr. Rivera and maybe Mr. Perez Verdia brought related to homelessness that I think came out of unspent 2021 funds that I don't see on here. So just to Ms. LaFrance's point,
Yep.
I don't think this is the full story, but more information is great, and Desiree's getting it down. Go ahead, Mr. Salt.
Yeah, so that was my question. Essentially, budget's great, but what's the collections? So if we
Yep.
have that number in the future, perfect.
Yep.
Thanks.
Great. Sorry, I should have let you go first, Mr. Salt. Mr. Constant.
Thanks. And so I just want to make sure I understand what you just said, Courtney, that the fund balance number that we'll receive will include whatever is remaining from where we trued up from last year, this budget to actuals, whatever we've spent and revenues from this year.
No, revenues from last year. So last year was our first year. And so obviously Dan's group does an amazing job in predicting our revenues. But since it was our first year, it was kind of a little bit more of a wild card of where the revenues were going to land. So our budget was what they calculated out based on the statistics that they had and everything. But what happened is we actually seen a little bit more revenue come in than what we actually had budgeted for revenue. And so so then you take that, well, I don't want to say extra revenue, but basically all your revenues minus all your expenses then gets you your fund balance.
So let me just to make sure. So the 6.5 that's listed here was the budget to actuals for 2021 off of projected. Plus then there is probably what I'm hearing you say, some additional revenues that haven't yet been presented or were at some point on some small line of a spreadsheet. And so there's those two numbers and then subtract whatever additional costs will get us to where we are today.
Yes.
Okay. Now I understand the equation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Good point. Okay. Can we move on to 2022? Okay, line 1, early education grants to providers. If I recall correctly, those grants all went to ASD. And so I guess is that true, Courtney? Okay.
Yes. to
So
my knowledge.
my question is, since it's only encumbered but not an actual, has it not been spent yet? Do they have to spend that by the end of the year? What's the status? Because now we're almost in September.
I can follow up with the health department, but to answer the latter part of that question, yes, it has to be spent by the end of the year.
Okay.
And so I don't have the status of it, but we'll sure follow up with the health department to see where they are in issuing that.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
I think we wrangled around this question a little bit once before. And so I just want to understand, I know the funds have to be appropriated when we have revenues and spent that year. Can we reappropriate those funds to those grantees so they can spend them in next year, separate from this year, upcoming year's process?
So that would be what we would say would probably be a first quarter budget revision, is that then when we see what the fund balance is, we would have the ability to take the fund balance from the prior year to be able to say what funding is available to then appropriate additional funds into 2023. So right now we have, X amount of revenues that Dan's amazing group is going to give us, to build the 2023 budget. Those would be allocated out to different programs. And then if there was a desire to fund more, the recommendation would be is you wait until the first quarter when we know what that fund balance would be. So then you could.
Again, I think we're having a difference of language here. It wouldn't be to appropriate more. It would be allow them more time to spend the money that we already appropriated to them to the project they specifically applied for that we didn't get the money to until the 7th month of 12. And so my question continues to be, what's the process that we can use to allow those grantees who receive their notice for whatever reason now and have barely any time left to the end of the calendar year to actually implement their projects? Because again, and I don't want to belabor this too much, we have to figure this out. This is going to be an annual process. So they have a grant that they receive in September. They're told you have to spend it by the end of the year, or you might get it at first quarter, which means in May. And then they're going to have to do all that paperwork again at September to spend the money from last year. They're already applying for this year. So this is
Well, and not even in May, because
Right.
the first quarter is decided in April. By the time they actually get the grant
That's
out,
what I
we're
mean.
back to August or September
right,
again,
for
and then they
last
can't
year's
spend
money
it. Yeah.
and then for this year's money. And so our grant programs effectively are running 3 months. When you receive an annual grant to spend your money, you have a 3-month period to spend it in. That's reckless. And it creates a dynamic for our grantees that they're going to get in trouble and we're going to be bad stewards. And so I continue, and I'm going to let the floor go to reiterate, we need to fix this dysfunction.
I think that what you heard, I think in the last meeting when Miss Alger was here and went through the bid process, is that, they're working through that now this year, but I think that they have a mechanism where they're going to start that process towards the end of this year for next year, so that those grantees will see that money next year earlier, so they will have that time. I think that it was a new process with the purchasing department, and so they're working through those, and she had mentioned that she would start that process much earlier. So we can definitely follow up with her and see what that timeline will be, so that we can issue those grants earlier in the year to individuals, so they have
That would be
more
great.
time.
And Desiree, if you can get that down, I know Miss Alger was here last time, but maybe a more specific timeline of what she sees so that we can avoid this problem.
And just a finer point at the end of
Okay.
that question is, yes, we have a new process that may come forward that allows by the 3rd month grantees to get their money, or by the 2nd month. But for this year in particular, where we have grantees just getting awarded, what is the alternative for them? If we can do new grants by January or February, why can't we do reappropriations by January, so that the same grantees can have the opportunity to implement the funds for the applications they were already successfully awarded for, instead
Yeah.
of losing that opportunity?
Yeah, we should be able to know they haven't spent them yet, because you all know they haven't spent them, and immediately reappropriate January 1. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question might, if I ask it now, this is early, it might apply to some other things, although most other things looks like they're positions we haven't hired. But on line 4, with the direct grant to STAR, so it's budgeted and it's in the revised budget, obviously, but it's not encumbered. And so I'm sort of curious, why not?
Actually, so this is through July 31 of 2022. And so to date, it actually has been encumbered. And so again, that's, the budget versus actuals are on a monthly. So we have to point in time ended at the end of each month. So, but I did actually go in and look, and this has actually been encumbered now in August. So.
Great. All right, good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like some more information. It doesn't have to be here concerning the rules regarding alcohol tax funded grants, because I guess I'm not entirely clear why a recipient who receives a grant like in October would have to spend by the end of the year, because that would already show as an actual once the grant is awarded on the municipality's books. And so I guess I'm not entirely clear on that piece of it, and at some point would appreciate some additional information. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point, Madam Chair. Maybe, Courtney, do you want to respond or just put that on the list of questions for?
We
or
can
just-
put it on the list. I think
Okay.
what it is they are reimbursable grants. I don't know that we're just issuing, $100,000 to an agency and then saying, here's $100,000 to run your program. I think what we're doing is having some performance requirements and review on the grants. And so as a reimbursable grant, we're giving them at intervals, certain amounts up to whatever the award is. And so for some of the programs, if they had a full year, it might be the award is $100,000, but based on those intervals in the time frame, we wouldn't have, the $100,000 expended.
Quick follow-up.
Mhm.
Is that typical for any grants the municipality awards? Because it just strikes me as that for some organizations, that's a potential hardship to be able to front the resources to, do what they're being asked to do in the grant. And I don't mean to get us off
No,
track.
I think that's
I just need a
relevant,
little
yeah.
more information.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. No, we're set for an hour and a half. Mr. Constant was asking about the timeline for the meeting. On line 2, I know that this is sort of a hot topic that we discussed with Ms. Alger and you too, Courtney, last time. That encumbered amount, 149,000 out of the 2 million for this year for evidence-based grants. Has that gone up in August and maybe isn't reflected on this line, or any updates on that?
I will have to follow up on the grant piece for both of them to see, again, the grantees and the award amounts and those.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's see. Any other questions from members? Not yet. Line 5, I'm just noticing such a small amount spent. Do you know, it's small overall, but do you know anything about that?
I don't know. These are costs from APD and the Department of Law that get moved over here.
Okay.
So it just might be a timing issue of moving those costs.
Okay, got it. And then line 11, so in 2021, when we were way underspent for fire for the mobile crisis team, that made sense because it only started halfway through the year. Now, 375,000 out of the almost 1.6 million for the year seems incredibly low, given that if this went through July, this went through 7 months of the 12 months. So can you explain to us, does that mean that program is not operational? And that doesn't even include the 24/7. That's on a separate line item.
Yes, that is correct. That I will have to follow up with the fire department because they did receive the grant funds, for some of these services. And so I don't know if that is a combination of them moving their costs over there to the grant funding, which would free up the costs in the alcohol tax.
Was
fund.
that was the state grant we just
That was the 700,000.
acted on last meeting?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I hope that's it. Because I hope that program is functional and that money is sitting there. So I really hope that that's just a reflection of using the state grant. Line 12, we can see here that the April decision to increase the mobile crisis team to 24/7 it doesn't appear has made any move. I know that there's some classification issues. Any update on those?
We are still working with HR and the health department to look at how we can implement that across the different unions and still comply with our requirements.
It strikes me that we've been talking about that for, I don't know, 2 months maybe now. So is there a timeline you all can give us? I mean, this program is so important in the community. Is there a timeline someone could give us about
Okay.
when we'll get there so that when we have questions, we can answer those? And then lines 13, 14, 15, it looks like nothing has been spent. So again, one of those is the MCT, a new position. Doesn't look like it's been implemented.
Correct.
And then the Whittier piece, I think, yeah, so I guess the question is why, and timeline if it's a classification issue. And then the Whittier piece, I think Suzanne and John brought that forward. Doesn't look like that's occurred. Is that happening some other later this year or?
I'll follow up with the fire department and see where they are with issuing those funds. I don't know if they're working on any type of agreement or if those organizations have asked for the funding yet.
Okay. And line 17, looks like we're quite a ways below what we should be for crime analysts, dispatcher, and identification technician. These are all first responder, police department costs that.
That one actually,
Chief question.
they had some vacancies in other positions and then promotions out of these positions. And so these positions then become vacant and they go through the hiring process. So that's actually what happened with AP.
So they're working on hiring those
Yep.
ones now. Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Salt, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we want to put more work on you, but when someone receives a grant, so if I was a department chair, I would expect to get a budget or a finance documents every month saying, hey, you have this much left, you haven't spent that. So that last one made me kind of think of this. Do these grantees know they have the funds? And if they forget, do they get some kind of reminder like, you have these funds, we're trying to give them to you, but you may have had personnel changes or whatever, and you just forgot about it. So
I can ask. So the departments generally communicate with their kind of vendors, the organizations for those funds. And so I can ask what their process is, how much contact they've had with these guys. And then, when they expect to.
yeah, just a curiosity question. If someone's sitting there with no spend for 3 months, do we reach out to them and say, you are aware of this, right? If they've made no movement. So.
Okay, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think some of these public safety, police and fire situations could be that they are having difficulty hiring the people with the specific skills necessary to fill some of these newly created positions. And I mean, that seems to be the case in pretty much every business around right now. And I think the more specific skills and experience that you're looking for, it's even more difficult to find the people to fill those positions. So that could be why some of these funds have not already been encumbered or spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. LaFrance, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in relationship to our fuel discussion, and I know that that is not an approved use of these funds, but I'm just curious, like when some of these individuals are hired on and they're in a position that obviously involves driving or transportation, is there any way to include that additional overage out of here for their fuel costs? I don't know if that's pushing it too far, but do you know what I'm saying? Like if there are personnel who are added because of the alcohol tax, and that would drive up and add more pressure to the general fuel budget, is there a way to include some of that in here? And
I generally, in referencing what's allowable and what's not, I get legal's opinion on it just because charter interpretation is not my, area. But I don't really, for as far as the personnel that are in here, I'm not sure any of them are necessarily driving positions. The MCT might be, in their response a little bit, but generally, like the municipal attorneys probably aren't, they're in this building. They're not going to make their way around town much. The same thing with APD staff, they're in the headquarters building. So I think for the most part, they're pretty stationary positions. But I mean, if there's an area where we actually did have some fuel expenses, we could definitely look into it. But I would suspect the MCT would probably be the most.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking like the first responders. So thank you for that, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cross?
Well, and just to build off that, I guess the thought is if the budget is calculated on being adequately staffed, and we know they have an employee shortage, you know what I mean? They have then I guess, but there's a balance that happens because you're anticipating you're adding people, but if they budgeted for having more people, but we're hiring less, I guess it's interesting how those metrics come anyway, that's just my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Mr. Voland?
Thanks. I think maybe there is an argument to be made that if we're funding first responders, the first responders need fuel to get where they're going. So that's something we may want to consider as a body, if that's allowable.
Yeah, I think what would be most appropriate, we could certainly have that conversation. There's no lawyer in the room,
Right.
So I think we should just.
I have another question.
Well, Forrest is.
You're a lawyer too.
Forrest is self-identifying.
If it's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can
I
I
didn't
please-
see you.
I have a second question, if it's okay.
Hold on, Mr. Voland. Are you intending to answer that question specifically? Okay, so the question is, to what extent, and tell me if this is right, Ms. LaFrance, and Mr. Cross, to what extent can we spend non-labor funds such as fuels associated with labor funded by the alcohol tax-ish? Okay. If you don't know the answer right now, that's okay. I think we can talk about this in the future, but we're just trying to find ways to fund needed services. Can you put your mic on, please, Ben? Thank you.
Ben Bowman, Assistant Municipal Attorney. So just so I'm making sure I'm understanding the question, basically, can we use alcohol tax funds to pay for fuel costs related to alcohol tax programs? First responders
Exactly. So
specifically.
if you're a first responder and you drive a bus to respond, can that bus or van's fuel costs be charged to the alcohol tax? It's okay to think about it. This doesn't have to be something we have to resolve right now. So if you're unsure at this moment, that's okay.
Well, and I can give you a provisional answer and then a firmer answer subsequently. I
Great.
do believe that we can use alcohol tax funds to pay for the charter-defined services and fuel expenses related to the delivery of first responders, police should fall within that category. But we would need to
Okay.
separate those fuel costs from regular operational,
Right.
and they'd have to be fuel costs above the level which was established.
Of initial
prior to sale.
service.
Yeah, the initial service level.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense to
So-
me.
The mobile crisis team would be a key example of a separate, above what we were doing before.
Yep. That makes sense to me. Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, thank you. I think Mr. Bowman stated it, but I want to try to make it a little more clear. The MCT and the, maybe 2 or 3 positions we added under the alcohol tax in this budget, to me, those fuel costs are legitimate. But if we're looking to address the overall fuel costs for first responders, that is not permissible because the charter language that we added clearly says for new programs. And yes, it's true, this is a new expense because the price of fuel went up, but it's not for new services. The police and the road maintenance and everything else that existed. So there's only a handful of positions in here. So, maybe in the tens of thousands of dollars, whereas the challenge we have is in the millions. So I don't think the alcohol tax is a very significant part of that solution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think you're right. And just like to note that we now have 2 lawyers that have responded. I forgot I was a lawyer. And we have a 4th lawyer who's joined us, Ms. Salatel. And Mr. Volan, go ahead.
So then my next question is on line 18. I don't think we addressed that yet. $500,000. That was a Zolotel amendment. Fund trainings that will focus on the rollout of new equipment, case law updates, de-escalation, cultural awareness, wellness, and significant policy changes. Would allow up to 20 hours of in-service training per officer in 2022. APD will provide a report to the Assembly on these efforts no later than October 2022. Is that another one where maybe there's an update and there are encumbered funds for that now?
I don't believe that there are any encumbrances as current. The last update that we had from them was that the intent is to spend that fully by the end of the year. But I will remind them that they have an October deadline for a report to the Assembly.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. And you just smiling? I misinterpret smiles. It's like this business is really getting me to be kind of weird. Okay, Ms. Altel, what we've been doing is we're just running through questions. Any questions you have, we've just been sort of going down the list. So for line 24, same question about Home for Good. And I think you were out, Ms. Altel, but Mr. Volan said that hopefully in the Health Policy Committee, when it gets running again, that you all might hold a work session or a committee meeting that talked about the Home for Good program and got an update where we are, et cetera. In 25, this number, so, and this, just for your reference, Ms. Altel, is at the end of July is where this was, oh yeah, it says at the top, accounted. So 276 for line 25 out of 655, that's definitely less than half and should have been at the 7-month mark. Is that just as a result of, I mean, we know we've had dozens of people, well, I shouldn't say dozens, many people leave the health department. Is that part of why that cost is low?
It might be due
Oh,
to
you're next.
turnover.
I forgot about you. I'm sorry.
And I can check and see, but I would suspect that it's due to turnover in certain positions.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Mr. Constant, you wanted to get in the queue a while ago.
That ship sailed on the previous discussion, but on this one as well, the health department. Michael Chadwick is here, and when I see any revenues now expended under a project that was essentially implemented by the previous health department director, I have grave concerns where those dollars went, how they went, what they went for. And so for my part, this is one area that I want a close review of on how we spent the alcohol tax, how agreements were made, what agreements were made, and where the money's going.
Okay, I apologize again. I forgot. Too excited with all the lawyer talk. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick comment on Mr. Constant's comment, and that is Mr. Chadwick and I briefly discussed that I will have a forthcoming, the Vice Chair and I will have a forthcoming request to the Audit Committee to consider that review in a forthcoming audit that gets moved up on the list of scheduled audits. And I expect that the chair of the audit committee will be likely scheduling an audit committee meeting soon, as there are a couple audits that have just been completed and will be coming on separate topics, will be coming before members soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking, we have 15 minutes. I see some folks who may want to give audience participation. I'm not sure. So try to keep us moving. I think 26, 27 are probably FEMA, but that could go on the list of questions. 28, can someone remind me which facility that was? And I'm wondering why it hasn't been encumbered or appropriated.
Complex
or
care
granted.
is the sockeye.
Yep.
So what's the status of those funds?
We will put that on the list.
On the
status.
list,
Yep.
okay. I think that's it. Line 36 for me is just a good place to remind everyone that If staff were here, I would ask them to give an update. I think Claire and Allie are working on this, but the feedback and communication with the public around the alcohol tax. So I think that's it. Ms. Altel?
Do you want an update on line 36? I know
Sure,
things.
yeah.
So line 36 was an amendment I brought forward for a strategic plan around fire department staffing levels. That's been kicked off with a company called Facets. They do this around the country. They've already engaged with Anchorage Fire Department personnel, IAFF. They've met with some assembly members. So we should have their report looking at different opportunities and options for us right in the heart of the budget discussions.
Great. And sorry, I mixed up. 36 was the one you just mentioned and 37 was the communication. So that was my bad. Okay. If there are no other questions, I'd like to move on to the next topic. And given that we only have 15 minutes, sorry, Alden, maybe you could just give us a quick, we have the handouts, so maybe you could just give us a quick sort of overarching conceptual, we've collected a little bit more money, we're still working on it, sort of update, and then we'll move to Dan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief. Just a couple of comments. One, I did add some wording and some little graphical things with Desiree based upon your comments the last couple of assembly meetings. So hopefully it reads a little bit better and has a little bit more graphics to show some of your questions. We put a box around the obligated and the paid just so you had an idea that those were together. I would, of course, love to have positive reports with regards to us receiving more money and having projects obligated. However, you see those change categories are all empty at this particular point. We have had some challenges with the state in both getting paid as well as them. They have to review our projects prior to obligation, and the person that we were assigned was on vacation half the time since our last meeting. So not a lot has gotten through the state at this particular point. I will give you some good news, however. The PW1, which is the very top project, they did get to us last night. We have moved that, and it is now in FEMA's courts to be obligated. So I fully expect that the top project will be shown as obligated in the next time we do this. So it is now in FEMA's court, and there is a few more steps for them to do, but not necessarily in an evaluation process. The second project on there is in the state's hands, and the moment they get it to us, we will review it and hopefully have a similar result with regards to that. The focus, however, over the last month has been on the not yet documented information on the very bottom of the spreadsheet. Last month, we came with a number that was about 97 million, and you will currently notice that we have a little over 115 million documented. So we were aggressive in documenting our projects, putting those expenditures into those projects that we were developing. So there's been a significant increase. And now you can see we've got just under 28 million that have documented. We will start now over the next month of moving those projects into FEMA's court. So they're going to start moving from the bottom of this spreadsheet to the top so we can start getting them reviewed in the process. Just to give you an idea with a time frame, we have a couple of projects up on top that they've had for several months now, and we asked for an estimated time from them to have their review completed. That's not approval, review, and their end of October. So it does take a long period of time for these, but we do need to get them in their court. But we are we had a large gap between expenditures and documented, and now we're down to just about a little over 6 million. So we made an aggressive effort to get that done. And the next month, we're going to be aggressive in moving those projects into the FEMA's hands, probably starting with the projects that are have older time periods like 2020 and 2021, and then leaving our 2022 until the very end as we move through here. But that's where we've spent our efforts, and I am hopeful that they will pay us some money over the next month. There's no reason why they shouldn't, as well as hopefully we'll get one, if not both of those projects obligated on the top. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your work, Alden. Before we move to Mr. Solt, can I just get a show of hands? Is there anyone here from the public who's hoping to speak? Okay, one member. So we'll just make sure to leave time. Thank you. Mr. Solt, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Super fast. So it looks like you have a pretty good success rate of when you submit documented expenses to being reimbursed. So high 90s, would you say? From what you've heard back from them.
Well, certainly if the money is obligated, we will get that money eventually from the state.
I will say that, they're still reviewing these projects. There's a continuing basis of challenge to some of our expenditures, and our policy has been to take out questionable ones so the rest of them can continue moving. So I do think that those projects in the top, as they work through them, our hope is always that they will ultimately get reimbursed. I can say that none of the top projects that are currently being evaluated, there are any requests for information on us. So FEMA has everything that they need, all of our extra reporting, and there are no additional questions. So that is always a positive, because every time they come up with questions, it just makes it more challenging to be able to respond. But I don't want to be super positive, because it just I'm always worried about what they're doing. But I do feel confident that many of these projects ultimately will be reimbursed once the entire process is gone through.
Great. Thank
But I
you
wouldn't want to put a percentage on.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I keep forgetting Chris. I can't believe he's not nudging me. Okay, go ahead.
Yep.
I'm just looking this way.
So you kind of said it, but I just want to be really clear because I wasn't clear last month. When you say something is in that obligated column, that means essentially they've agreed to pay.
Yes.
The 48.469 million that's in the obligated column means that the state and FEMA, because there's a state project in there as well, has reviewed the expenditures and have agreed that those expenditures are reimbursable to the municipality of Anchorage.
Great. So
Yes.
yes, yes is the answer. I heard that in there somehow. So then we are now down to what it looks like to be maybe 27 to 30 million dollars. You say 27,752 here, but when I do 48 plus 41,
It's slightly different
Oh, I see
through
the
the chair,
slightly
Mr. Khan.
different numbers.
They are currently evaluating the difference between 48 and 87. So that $40 million is still in FEMA's hands right now, where they are reviewing those expenditures for ultimate agreement that those are eligible. In addition to that 40 million, they don't even have the 27.7 yet in their hands to make that determination. That's why we're going to move those expenditures into their hands. But they've only agreed to 48 million out of our 115 million that we've had documented.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe, Alden, in your next iteration of this, in obligated, you could put in parentheses, agreed to pay, or something like that. And then maybe in the other one, it's paid, just so we know.
We will keep trying to find the right wording so that you all know. I'm sorry
You
it's
use such
complicated, but I
fancy
do want
words.
to try to lay out the picture, but I understand it is a little complicated. We will do our best to try to get the wording again.
Thank you. And I'm just thinking, if I were a member of the public and I didn't listen to this, but I looked at the document, just trying to make it as straightforward as possible.
And just one last comment, that's what we put the box around there. 48.4 million has been obligated, of which we've been paid 41.3. That's,
Yep.
and we will get that difference once the state decides to pay us. But the rest of it is all in FEMA's hands, or will be in FEMA's hands once we move those projects up.
Great. Okay, time is ticking. We have about 7 minutes left. Dan, let's move on to 3E. And I looked through the report. I did notice the 5.5 in community assistance that we had brought up last time you had added. So must mean that you agree. Can you speak to that and anything else that pops out to you?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Dan Moore from Treasury. Before I start, I just want to make sure I introduce a couple other people from Treasury. There's Paula Ricewig, if you can raise your hand. And then next to Paula is Glenn Cipriano. Glenn is the new Deputy City Treasurer. So he's going to help me a lot with the trust fund and also with revenues. And so that's, I'm really glad to have Glenn here.
Great, welcome.
Okay, so in a couple months from now, Glenn will actually be sitting at the table because I'll be out of town. So Glenn and Paula will be together on that. Okay, so I know you're really short on time. I actually have a lot to talk about, but you're very short on time. So I'll kind of cut to the chase. I'll just give like really quick highlights, okay? So
Can you pause for a second? I mean, we could extend by a few minutes. Do folks want to do that to give Dan a little more time?
Sure. I move to extend by 5 minutes.
A lot to talk about. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, well.
Okay, we'll start with 5 minutes. Let's try.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for those extra 5 minutes. All right. So I will really try to summarize so I can leave it open for questions here. But the revenue picture for this year is actually quite positive. It's not just the municipal assistance that is coming extra strong, and that was verified. Desiree helped verify, and then Marilyn Bansoff in OMB helped with the further verification. So that is a solid number. It's a $5.5 million of positive revenue variance. The other two really large positive variances are actually three. One is in PFD. We expect at least $500,000. It could be quite a bit more than that, but we're trying to be conservative. Just so you know, because I know the earlier discussion was about fuel costs and certain departments, 98% of the PFD money goes to the police department. So if they're going to have additional revenues because of PFD, that hopefully will help their overall budget, just as a heads up there.
Dan, can I ask?
Yes.
Why is that? Is it pursuant to our code?
It's because the revenues that are garnished are originated by the police department, traffic tickets, criminal fines, et cetera.
Got it.
So it goes back
Okay.
to the department
That makes
that
sense.
created the revenue. or the
Enforce has a question too.
Enforcer, yes.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, Ms. Zoloto just mentioned the towing. That might also be a good place for them to use that. But I guess my question is, so I think there's going to be in the coming days, weeks and months, hopefully, a resolution or a sort of appropriation measure that will originate with the administration, and we can work on them with it, that basically appropriates money from one pool to pay for fuel costs. Now, I understand that that's not actually how it works. I understand it actually works like all these different departments, and this 500,000 originated with the police, so it's going to stay with the police traditionally. But let's all wrap our minds around the idea that there's a perception in the public right now that we're short on fuel costs, and we are going to pass something that says, here is your money for fuel costs. And so that $500,000 of the police department, that might be part of it. Does this make sense? And I think it's so the public understands that we as a body and the administration together are solving this this money for fuel problem. And so we might identify that $500,000 from PFD, for example, in that resolution or that appropriation measure. Is that clear? And is that going to cause any problems, do you think?
It'll be up to the administration, OMB, of course, but in working with the assembly. I will say by the third week of September, within a day or two of that first major distribution of PFD, we're going to know just how big that number is, and we can extrapolate from there. So we can firm up the revenue to make sure it's sufficient.
Well, the good news is, as we learned, APD is one of the people who most need this additional fuel money. And so it won't look like we're taking from the APD and giving to another department. It will look like we're using this pot of money and we're solving the problem that mostly exists at street maintenance, transit, and APD.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I think it's just another example or another request to please tell us how much money you need and let's find it together. Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Okay, so the big positives, PFD is one of them. Room tax, rental vehicle tax, and then of course municipal assistance. Those are the big positives. There are some fairly significant negatives, so we want to make sure you know about that. We're projecting MUSA is going to be off a bit. That's a calculated number. It can vary based on the components of the calculation. Private PILT is primarily Chugach Electric. It's also a calculated number based on a contractual formula. The cash pool, which can vary quite a bit month to month. Right now, it's projecting to be about $500,000 under the budget. And then fuel excise tax. That one is reduced consumption. And primarily, we also did a large payment of a back tax on that. So that is going to be about $1.5 million under budget is our current projection. I will say on fuel excise tax too, just as a reminder, the current municipal code calls for an automatic CPI adjustment to the fuel tax every 5 years. And we've done a preliminary calculation. It needs to be double checked to make sure we're correct, but it looks like it'll be about 1 penny. So going from 10 cents per gallon to 11 cents per gallon. It's not huge, but the way the code is written, it automatically goes into effect January 1 of next year. So just a heads up that's there, and we're going to provide a memo to OMB for their consideration. Okay, let's see. And the other negative would be an EMS ambulance transport. That one is missing budget. It looks like it'll miss budget by several $1 million. So I would like to just comment real quickly on a couple of the bigger ones. I know room tax is always very interesting. We've been tracking it very, very closely. We saw the May number. We saw that it was up 19%. We got the second quarter number. It was up 58% over the prior second quarter. It is very, very beyond anyone's projection. So
Even ours. Just kidding.
even yours, yeah. So it will mean several million dollars. I'm not going to quote a number today, but several $1 million more to the general government budget this year. And that's good news. I mean, it is very, very much driven by price. So maybe next year will be a high price environment, but at some point those prices are going to cool down, and you would not want to budget a sustainable budget based on extremely, extremely high prices. So the same story is going on with rental vehicle tax. Rental vehicle tax is actually a little more understandable in terms of the dynamics, because we know there's car shortages and we know there's a lot of demand. You come visit Anchorage, you need a car. People like Turo, entities like Turo, we did get them registered last year. They are a major player in the market. So that the rental car, this is just amazing to me, but we budgeted a rental car at 8.3 million. We expect it's going to be $9 million over that. And about almost 2 million of that is from major action that we did on some back taxes. So that also sort of distorts the picture in a good way, but it's going to be a very significant positive variance with rental vehicle. We can predict the rental vehicle better than we can predict room tax. And in the big quarters for both room tax and rental vehicle are the third quarters. But for rental vehicle, 58% of the annual revenue is in the third quarter. We haven't even seen the third quarter yet, but second quarter was very, very strong. It was up 41% over the prior second quarter.
Wow.
So
Mr. Moore, I'm going to
yeah.
stop you there just
Okay,
because I have a
I'll
couple
pause
people
there.
in the queue. Also wanted to point out, I've heard, although I haven't seen anything yet, that the fuel shortage of funds that we have is maybe about 3 million. This is 3 times that amount. So that would be a very easy other way to solve it. Go ahead, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. And first of all, thank you for the information and great work with the back taxes work. Can you just give a quick net inside and outside of the cap, up or down, and what that looks like as far as summary?
I would say pretty much all of these taxes, anything that says tax, is inside the cap except for room tax. That's always been outside the cap. And of course, alcohol tax, which is a special fund. So everything else is within the cap. If it's a fine or a fee, then those they're not even subject to the tax. So in terms of your question, Ms. LaFrance, I apologize, I bounced around a bit. If the room tax were going to be several $1 million above what's budgeted, $3+ million outside the cap, just as a starter number. So
Seems a little low given the 9 million.
Yeah,
Right.
correct.
Okay. But that's the room tax. That's not the rental vehicle tax, right?
The rental vehicle tax was $9 million over its budget.
Right.
That's what we're projecting. We said for room tax, several $1 million over its budget. So, if you want to start with 3 million,
Yeah, so that's
then
10 right there.
and that is the general government portion of room tax, which is about 43%. Okay.
So Ms. LaFrance, wasn't your question just sort of a simple number? How much positive are we? Positive variance
Yeah.
overall?
Yeah. Okay. And so I did add those numbers up, and it's about $11 million net positive. But
to be the mayor right now, how glorious that would be.
But
it'd be so easy.
If you took municipal assistance, room tax, and rental vehicle tax, those are the 3 big ones that are just driving that number. But like I said, there are negatives in there, but net it's about $11 million.
Excellent, thanks.
So,
We're
okay.
running out of time. So Mr. Constant, would you mind moving to do another 5 minutes?
Sure, I would make a motion to extend for another 5 minutes.
Any objection? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. And let's do your question, and then if we can, move to Courtney, if you're okay with that, Dan?
Yes.
Yeah, so my question actually follows almost precisely upon Ms. LaFrance's question. My question was going to be, and I hate to make your report more complex, but could you provide us in future reports with a snapshot to see the variance that you're anticipating for this month's report, so that instead of just your crib notes you have there, it's actually in the report, so we can understand if we're above or below anticipated expenses or revenues?
Sure. Through the chair to Mr. Constant, we can do that. I actually purposely didn't do that because this is our first report with some real data that we can, I could potentially do it for the next one. Once we get the third quarter information, I will definitely do it. And I did do it last year. There was a big shaded area at the bottom. It's just so early. It's hard to start quoting numbers without a bigger picture.
It's great. You could put whatever caveats in there to help us understand, well, I'm not really telling you this number, but this is what this overall shows us, right? So you can caveat it however you need to be comfortable, but I think that would answer the question that Ms. LaFrance and I had pretty tightly.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Dan, thank you so much. Excellent information as always. Courtney, did you want to, well, moving on to, I guess I should be official here, 3F. Did you want to point anything out? Are there any departments? I know we've talked about the fuels issue, but anything else you want to bring up as an issue that we should be aware of?
I think we highlighted both of the issues, which is, excuse me, the fuel and the towing, which are the two that I have noted here on the bottom. And then the same departments that, you know, are kind of evening out based on their high trend of spending in the first quarter for lease payments and things. And now they're just kind of trending out through the rest of the year. So yeah, the fuel and the towing were really the big items that were.
And are you going to follow up with us, or is Lance with all the details?
I will work with him on getting some information. And so I will probably send it to you, but we'll work together.
And if it's in the form of a resolution, that's okay too. I think we're all open. So Ms. Elta has a question, then Mr. Constant, and then we're going to move to audience participation.
Thank you. So I asked this question at the assembly meeting when we accepted the grant for $750,000 from the state for the mobile crisis team. At the time, our previous month's budget to actual showed that we were only spent $130,000 in that program. What are we spent in that program? And the reason I'm asking is because that grant amount only covered from January to the end of June. And then we had to submit all expenses within 60 days or by the end of this month. So
that's the number as of July 30th, 375.
So what are we going to do with the rest of the grant money? Just not take it?
That was already on the list of a follow-up to see what the spend was and if they had vacancies, but also I can check and see if they have already moved all of the expenses to their grant. As far as I know, the intention is to fully utilize it. So the fire department will.
But it was specifically for mobile crisis. So I guess if we do have $750,000 worth of expenses, I guess I would like to know what they are, because I mean, this is better, 375. That sounds more in line with what might actually be happening. But I also remember that the time to submit the expenses was very short. I believe we only have till the end of the month. Otherwise we lose the opportunity. So I just want to, I guess I'll come back to it again next month to see where we landed. Thanks.
Yeah, excellent question. If we haven't spent 750, are we foregoing that portion of the grant? Mr. Constant.
Thanks. And you just sparked this. I had a chat with a higher level manager at the fire department on this very question and was told to be patient and know that that money has been spent, that we shouldn't be concerned, but it's good to make sure that they get that accounted for. So I did have that conversation specifically on that line. My question is relating to line 27 on the report, real estate. Curious why that's running hot and what's actually happening in the real estate department. We might need to get a briefing on that separate from this meeting, but
We pay all of our lease payments in the beginning of the year. So a large chunk of their non-labor gets paid immediately in the start of the year. And so then we trend throughout the year as not having that many additional expenses after that. So the largest piece of their budget is their leases that they pay.
Thanks.
Great answer. Okay, with that, I'm going to invite the member of the public who wanted to speak to come forward. We can run over a few minutes, that's fine. Are there any members of the public who have joined us who want to speak? If so, would you raise your hand? Okay. If you could, thanks, Desiree. Yeah. And just if you could identify yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone. I'll be brief because I know Forrest graced us with 5 minutes. And so, hello, everyone. I'm Celeste Hodge Groudon. I am the president and CEO of the Alaska Black Caucus, and also here as a representative of the Theory of Positive Change, a group of over 200 organizations and individuals that came together in 2020 who wanted to see the alcohol tax dollars make generational change in Anchorage, not just fund emergencies. So we're thankful for what has taken place thus far and what has been shared, but recognize that so many of these dollars simply aren't getting spent now. They're not being spent. For example, take my glasses off. We're very concerned from these documents the Muni has shared that roughly only 30% of the allocated funds have been spent, and wonder what the plan is to address the current problem for next year. We're also concerned about the process for the bucket number 2 grantees, and we've heard that over and over today, very little time for them to do meaningful work. Consistency matters, and being able to fund programs year over year help them stabilize. It's an investment to get real outcomes that takes time and certainty. We hope to see 2023 RFPs by November of this month to get funding out to grantees in very early 2023. We also have questions about why there are such large line items not being spent, especially, as we've heard, the mobile crisis team work at AFD. And just a short story, and I've shared this because I was just so impressed about what I learned about the mobile crisis team and the ability to call them instead of 911. And when I was at church recently, I needed to utilize that service. Unfortunately, I found myself scrambling, frustrated, panicking, because when I attempted to dial the number, there was no answer. I was told to call another number. And at the end of the day, I ended up calling 911. And so I just want to reiterate the need to get the mobile crisis team up and running 24/7. Lastly, we'd like to offer whatever community support is needed to help with
Ms.
this.
Hodge-Groudon, that's 3 minutes. So if you could just wrap up quickly. Thank
With this process of connecting organizations with the administration and the assembly to help move this this process forward with spending the alcohol tax funding. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Desiree, would you mind putting on the list that with the timing for FY23 that we have a request from the Theory of Change to put out RFPs starting in November of 2022 and ask Ms. Alger or whoever's running the health department if that's what they're planning to do. Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to make a request to the Assembly if you could also include any infrastructure grants, the amounts that are being targeted and the amounts that have been awarded or expected to be awarded. I think that would be helpful too as an additional source of revenue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thanks. And that reminds me, at a recent Assembly meeting, I asked Ms. Demboski what community directed spending, i.e. earmarks, they had requested from Senator Murkowski's office. And I haven't heard back, but I just sent her an email asking for that information again, so that to the extent the assembly with any contacts or connections we have can work collaboratively with the administration to get funds in to do important things we're doing here at the Muni, we can help. So I'll keep you all posted. If I get that, I'll have Desiree or someone else circulate it.
I'd like to put a fine line on that when we were in Senator Murkowski's office last time, she told us directly that she won't fund or fight for projects that we don't agree between the legislative branch and the executive branch. And so while the executive branch has put forward a proposed slate of projects to them, we've never heard about it. And that's a recipe for disaster for them, because with a simple call, those projects could all be scuttled for lack of any presentation to this body on what their proposals are. And so it'd be a shame to see us lose where we could have united, because instead it was decided that that's none of your concern.
Okay, well, I emailed Ms. Simboski, so hopefully we'll get that list and then we can work collaboratively. Anything else? Any other members?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.